Aspen Magazine, 1965-1971, from the postbox to the museum crate. Taking as starting point the archive exhibition Aspen Magazine, 1965-71, which took place at the Whitechapel Gallery in London in 2012 and is now in Wrocław Contemporary Museum, I will focus on a few observations that I made during the process of researching and curating Aspen Magazine, a publication which has now become a museological object. I'm not going to draw a detailed picture of Aspen in the talk as a whole, and I'm not going to go into detail of each issue, again on purpose, because I think one has a lot to discover by their own readings or better viewings of the magazine. So the notes I made, I hope, might be used as background for the viewing of the exhibition tonight at the opening, rather than as a guide to it. And these points I'm going to make are in relation to Aspen's relationship with the reader, the museum, the artists, and technology. Quite brief points, but I think they may help. So, not conforming to the conventions of other periodicals, Aspen Magazine was available by subscription only, and every issue came as a surprise to the reader. This is a phrase that circulates a lot when we read about Aspen. Each issue was entirely different from the previous one in terms of editorial line, as well as content and media. What is retrospectively regarded as a radical publication and artistic experiment, it proved a commercial failure for the publisher Phyllis Johnson, only to re-emerge in the late noughties as the rare and valuable object of the art collector's desire. A contemporary art magazine or an exhibition in a box, representative of facets of art production of that particular period in the US. So 10 issues of Aspen Magazine were published in New York between the years on the title of the exhibition, 65 and 71. Each one was edited and designed by a different editor. And just to name a few, Phyllis Johnson, who did the first, and then Andy Warhol and David Dalton, Quentin Fiore, Brian O'Doherty, John Hendricks, Mario Maya, Dan Graham, George McCunas, Angus MacLeese, and Hetty MacLeese. So quite different people covering all sorts of different spectrum of art production. So almost immediately after the second issue, the publisher gave carte blanche to the editors to pursue their issue as they wished. Whether this approach derived from a profound belief in editorial freedom or awareness of one's knowledge and limits in this area, perhaps also an acceptance that artists knew art better than a commercial publisher, the fact remains that Johnson's attitude was pivotal to the development of Aspen Magazine. So I'll just start with the first point, the relation to the reader. Aside from regarding Aspen as a groundbreaking artist publication, which includes definitely thought-provoking content, what one realizes almost at once is that an important attribute of this publication is that it actually repositions the reader simply by regarding reading itself as a performative act. So the configuration of the contents at any one of the Aspen issues does not lend itself to a conventional reading experience. Whilst handling it, the reader has to unfold several elements, build structures, and seek a number of other apparatus in order to fully experience it. So to go through all the material that Aspen included, one had to use the magazine as a toolbox. Becoming a reader producer or a reader activator of its contents. Potentially, its subscribers' sitting room becomes a screening venue, a stage, and a gallery. One also realizes that this magazine has certain spatial aspects which need time and the appropriate environment in order to be fully unpacked, both in terms of physicality, but also of their meaning. Perhaps the domestic environment, providing autonomy to its proprietor, was indeed the best environment for Aspen, therefore making the subscription the most suitable way for its distribution. Its arrival at one's door instigated the process of its reading immediately in a way that it would have not been possible if it was available through bookshops, magazine stands, or even the library. it had to be experienced in the calm and secure domestic environment that post-war American landscape provided. A magazine to be read in the private space of the middle class, who recognized that it was innovative and were keen to spend some dollars on annually subscribing to a publication whose theme and contents were unpredictable. The second point I'd like to make is the Aspen magazine and the museum, because that's something you realize immediately when you curate objects, especially archival objects. So nowadays, the existing remaining issues of the magazine are either taken apart and lost, or disseminated, maybe, not lost, collected or hermetically sealed in museum cases, handled with white gloves, as we had to do those days here. From a curatorial perspective, this is an interesting and simultaneously challenging situation because it really reflects the transition of such an item from the post box to the museum crate, from the domestic to the museum. Initially, every artwork included in the publication was produced in copies, sometimes as many as 20,000, and automatically became the ownership of the Aspen magazine subscriber, whoever that person was. So when it was in circulation as a magazine, as soon as it was distributed, one could use its artwork contents as they wanted, but whilst finding its position in the process of historiography of art, Aspen, as a curated object, is treated very differently. For instance, now, every item included in the exhibition, which you will see tonight, is cleared for permission to be exhibited. This happened for the show at the Whitechapel Gallery, now for the show at Wrocław Contemporary Museum, and it will happen again for the next showing of Aspen at Charles Scott Gallery in Vancouver, in Canada, in the winter. A rather enormous task for exhibition organizers, which can easily become debatable. So initially, the Aspen reader was entitled to remove these very items and put them on their wall, listen to them, project them, and so on, but obviously not anymore. Johnson's estate does not hold copyrights for the magazine, in spite of the fact that museums and collectors have registered it as a rare and valuable item. After the exhibition, the Aspen issues protected in the museum vitrines will go back from the crate to a national public library where they would once again be handled for years to come, a common interplay inherent to the curating of archives. The third brief point...
Is that the V&A or not?
Yes, the National Art Library. It's very difficult to have complete sets, and so that's one of the very few ones. The third point is in relation to Aspen magazine and the artists that were part of its production. So to reiterate, just remind you the point that it was through the unrestrained editorial line that Aspen magazine, as it progressed, was led entirely by criteria set solely by the artist editors in charge. So contrary to other art projects where the artists are initially called in to bring a fresh look to an institution or a project, and as one can expect, when this approach becomes a repetitive formula, it somewhat ends up being a commissioned critique, so to speak. Aspen avoided this route, and it's evident that when this familiar trend of commissioning an artist is deployed by institutions and curators or even publishers, without some space for continuous self-reflection, the commissioned artists become extensions somewhat, even if, not their artwork, but overall of the project's own promotional apparatus or the museum's, the institution's branding strategy. But what was important in Aspen, I think, is that the artists were not commissioned to provide a solution or a commentary, but to become commissioners themselves. And as such, in most of the cases, their contribution to the magazine was as important to them as was their own artwork, which they made independently for maybe the gallery, museum, or public space. One needs to bear in mind, that at the same time, a number of artists were leaving the gallery space anyway and entering into the public sphere, looking for other ways of circulation of their work amongst their peers and the public. And it's precisely at that moment that Aspen captures the exploration for the presentation of art in alternative spaces. I can change that. So. Here it is. In order to connect to the original archive exhibition at the Whitechapel Gallery and to investigate how the project was regarded in the present day, we conducted interviews with some of the artists and designers, so including Brian O'Doherty, David Dalton, and Dan Graham. We also included in the exhibition interviews which were conducted by another Aspen researcher based in the Netherlands called Martin Hageldonk, and you can listen or read the interviews in the exhibition. What comes out from the interviews is that the artists consider their contribution to the magazine as an integral part of their core body of work. For instance, Brian O'Doherty pushes this assumption further by referring to the issue 5 and 6, which he edited. This is the complete set here, which you can see downstairs. And quote from Brian O'Doherty, "The work was complete in itself, and it was, according to some, a monument of conceptualism, an early monument of conceptualism, if we rather pretentiously call it that," end quote. And he continues, "It was also an exhibition in a box, so it was one of the first conceptual exhibitions." At another instance, he stated, "It was the most complete work I have ever made." Mel Bochner's contribution for Aspen 5 and 6, 7 Translucent Tears, which is also included in the exhibition, and you can see it here on the left, is a drawing for the small work that you will see in 5 and 6, and is constructed of 7 pieces of tracing paper and a 7x7 grid of words and symbols, replacing mass with language. As it described by Bochner himself, he said, "It's the thinnest sculpture I could ever imagine making." The drawing for this work is now considered an artwork in its own right. Similarly, Robert Smithson's Strata, which is on the right-hand side, is the brown, darker piece with the images and text. You'll see downstairs better. So it's called Strata, Photographic Fiction. It's a piece which he contributed in issue 8, which was edited by Dan Graham, and regards the magazine in general as a sculpture, considering the layers of the printed matter as geological strata. So, quote, "My sense of language is that it is matter and not ideas, i.e. printed matter." Robert Smithson, June 1972. One more artist. Dan Graham's work started precisely as magazine pieces, for example, Figurative in 1965 and Schema in 1966. Graham describes Schema, which was included in Aspen 5 and 6, as one of his most important pieces ever. That's what he said to us. Schema is, in retrospect, a very important piece, not just in Graham's career, but also in the history of conceptual art. Graham's personal statement attests that his approach to the magazine as a medium was an important platform for him, in a similar manner that other more concrete and prevailing channels of the art market were for other artists. His response to a question I asked on how he developed the editing of Aspen 8 in relation to his own interests at the time, he said, quote, "In fact, I was really interested in this kind of cutting-edge idea between philosophy, scientific theories, and new ideas of information, and I think in a kind of a way, my issue picked up on my passions at the time. There was a time of disposable press, and the magazine, as a kind of disposable form, was something I really liked." Unquestionably, one cannot refer to all the artist's statements above without considering that precise moment in time, so the beginning of conceptual art in its broader sense and end of minimalism. On the other hand, both Dan Graham and Brian Doherty cannot dissociate their contribution to the magazine from the historical context of conceptual art, but on the other hand, some artist contributions in the magazine remain unknown and unregistered. It's worth mentioning here in passing that many artist estate holders, for instance, that we approached for copyright had no knowledge that the artist in question had made artwork for Aspen, some didn't know Aspen, and the respective catalogues raisonnés lack this information. This could be seen as a symptom, of course, of a particular art and the fact that art outside the museum or gallery very frequently did not register in official art history. Similarly, Aspen Magazine was never mentioned in any of Johnson's, the publisher, curriculum vitae, nor in any of the obituaries written after her death. It was just simply ignored. No mention there. That's why it was so difficult to research the beginnings of the exhibition, the magazine. And the last point I want to make is in regards to Aspen and technology. Aspen's ability to embrace the existing technology available at the time is reflected in its contents and medium, which interpenetrated conventional and unconventional ways of reading the magazine. Indicating the emergence of information society, Aspen echoed technological innovation as it embraced the flexible reproducibility of the artwork. If one looks at the advertisements included in the very first issue, Aspen Magazine was favored by giant companies such as Xerox and IBM as an appropriate platform for their promotion. It's interesting to observe that those up-to-the-minute companies made their advertising budgets available for ads in what was undeniably a publication with quite limited distribution and which had a niche readership. In other words, a risky investment, nevertheless appealing from a marketing point of view. I would also like to refer to the frequently repeated sentence, "Every issue came as a surprise to the reader." Indeed, this is accurate when one considers the unpredictability of the format and the contents of each Aspen issue, even for its own publisher. As Johnson stated in her first editorial, quote, "For this issue, we started with a rather dignified format, but who knows what the next issue will be," end quote. So in this sense, the term surprise best describes the reader's response to receiving the issue through the post and also reflects a sense of expectation. Bernardo Doherty also in one interview said, "I heard repeatedly that many who received the box," and he's referring to 5 and 6, "who were expecting something else threw it away. That's one of the reasons why it's so rare now and why it's so difficult to find." But to return to the technological. However, I would like to refer to the element of surprise, not in relation to the subscriber's response to the contents, but to the primary process one goes through in order to experience those contents. The magazine cannot be browsed in any kind of sequential manner, but it seemingly presents at once multiple possibilities in terms of the order and sequence of choices one can make. In this sense, also, although in reality very tactile, it has a parallel to the contemporary reader's experience when instant surfing the internet. Going from one page to the other, opening links and returning to previously unexplored web pages whilst listening to audio elements and viewing images, an early proto-electronic reading experience, if one may stretch it there. And to conclude, and very devices, you needed all the technological apparatus of the time. So the publication ended after 6 years and 10 issues. The 11th issue, to be edited by Richard Buckminster Fuller, was never realized, although it was promoted. A poster on the wall of the exhibition documents the US Postmaster General's 20th August 1971 ruling claiming that each issue of Aspen is complete unto itself and bears no relation to prior or subsequent issues, and that each issue of Aspen could be considered to be an independent work capable of standing alone. But for them, that was not a good thing, because on this basis, the Postal Service withdrew the lower postage rates afforded to conventional magazines, and Aspen subsequently folded, as according to the ruling, it was not a magazine because of its format and its frequency of publishing. So failing to comply even with the basic definition of a periodical, a publication issued at regular intervals, Aspen was launched as a big idea and ended as a commercial failure, its very identity as a magazine being challenged. This antithesis manifests the complicated negotiation between artistic experimentation and the vagaries of the cultural industry market. I'll just finish with a small quote I took from Gwen Allen's book, Magazines as Medium. To publish a magazine is to enter into a heightened relationship with the present moment. And in retrospect, we realize that Aspen was an influential archaeology of the present. So thank you.